I'm Sandra Bendayan. I'm here with Shiro Takeshita. We are doing an interview for the Holocaust Oral History Project. Today is the 17th of September, 1996, and John Grant is our producer. Could you please start out by introducing yourself and tell where and when you were born, and if your name was different when you were born than it is now in any way?
Okay. My name is Shiro Takeshita. I was born in Salinas, California on September 7th, 1921.
And what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Masamoto Takeshita, and my mother's name was Yaye Takeshita.
And did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have 5 brothers and 1 sister.
And where are you? The eldest, the youngest?
I am the 3rd from the youngest, but actually I'm the 2nd from the youngest because my youngest brother died while he was a baby. He was only 27 days old, so we usually don't include him in the family. But I'm the fourth son, and I don't know what else.
And what kind of work did your family do?
My father was a tailor, and my sister, who was the oldest of the children, was a beautician, and my oldest brother was an optometrist. He had just gotten out of University of California in 1939, and he had just started his business in 1940 and had just begun to really increase his business to where it was fairly lucrative, and that's when the Pearl Harbor was bombed.
And your parents immigrated from Japan?
Yes.
Do you know about when they came to the United States?
Yes, my father came in 1906, right at the time of the earthquake in San Francisco.
Did they speak English?
No,
Oh.
had no English.
Did they ever learn English along the way?
A little bit. My father did because he was in the tailoring business. When he first came to America, he had no occupation here, but they lived in Oakland first until around 1917 or 1918, and that's where he learned the tailoring business. And then from there, he moved the family. There are 2 brothers. 2 brothers and the sister were born in Oakland, and the rest of us were all born in Salinas.
So all of the children were born in the United States?
Yes.
I see. They were married when they came? Your parents?
Yes, I think they were. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if my mother came later or not, but it's possible that she did. I don't know the true story about that. But
So did you grow up bilingual in Japanese and English?
well, my Japanese isn't that good, but naturally we had to speak Japanese at home because that's all my parents could speak.
Were you raised with a religious point of view?
My family was a Protestant. We were Presbyterians, and that's how we grew up.
When the war broke out between the United States and Japan, what was your parents' point of view? Did they feel torn or?
No, I don't think they had any intention of going back to Japan. Having 6 children, their loyalty was all to the United States because they knew that the children would be here all the time, and they had no qualms about staying in the United States. And of course, at that time, they would have been citizens by then, but the only deterrent was that the U.S. government didn't allow them to become citizens.
What about, I mean, for them, they must have had relatives and friends back in Japan that they had feelings for. I presume.
Yes, they did, but there really weren't that many relatives left in Japan. And
Did you have other relatives that had emigrated to the United States, aunts and uncles or
No.
grandparents? No.
no,
So you never knew any other
no.
immediate relatives
No.
on either side?
By either side.
I mean, your mother's or your father's side?
Oh, no, I didn't know any of them, even in Japan.
And when you were growing up in Salinas, did you run into prejudice yourself?
Yes, definitely.
Do you remember any incidents that you could talk about?
Well, one thing was in schools where athletics were concerned. We were discriminated against in trying to make whether it be baseball, football, or whatever. And of course, it depended on the coach also. And it was in my senior year in high school that we got a new coach for our basketball team, and he had no prejudices at all. And this was the first time in the history of Salinas Union High School where we had 5 Japanese American basketball players on the squad, and that was a step in the right direction, because following us the following year there were 3 or 4 more, and so on, and it made a big change.
Were you among them?
I was in 1939. That was the final. I was a senior then, and I made the team on that occasion.
So you were one of the earliest.
Yes, yes. It was years and years before we had that many Japanese Americans on the team.
Were you were young then, but were you, your siblings, or your parents having any point of view about the war that was going on in Europe from 39 on?
No, we didn't have any. We just didn't like the Nazi regime. I mean, from what we read in the newspapers, and we didn't appreciate what Hitler was doing, and we also didn't appreciate what Japan more or less was doing also by joining the Axis countries.
And talk about how life started to change for you here in California during that war period.
Yes, well, I had just gotten out of junior college in Salinas in 1941, and I intended to try to go to University of California, but didn't have any money, so I was working out in the lettuce fields during the summer, and when school started in September of that year, I still didn't have enough money, so I was continuing to work until I could get enough money to go to school. So I was kind of in a transition period at that time where I would have been in school if I had the money, but otherwise I had to work to save some money for it.
And when did you first get wind or news of the fact that the United States was going to try to isolate the Japanese people?
We heard rumors and also articles here and there about how they were going to treat the Japanese Americans and the Japanese. And in Salinas, it must have been around January of 1942, where they started to build barracks at the rodeo grounds in Salinas. And later on we heard that these barracks were going to be where the Japanese Americans were going to be interned. And sure enough, that's what it was, because by end of March and early April, we were told to leave our homes and and go to these camps.
Do you know how you first heard of these rumors? I mean, were some knowledgeable people getting news from the government, or?
Most of it was in the newspaper, and one of the reasons we thought something was going to happen was because the FBI had incarcerated quite a few Japanese leaders in our community, and by leaders I mean the towns had what they call Japanese associations. And now they had to have those because they weren't allowed to join unions. They couldn't join a plumbers union or whatever, and they were more or less isolated by themselves, so that the only people they can talk to were their own kind. And so the FBI, when they first came, they didn't say anything to the families. They just came in and went into the homes, and they searched the homes and confiscated all the cameras and whatever, shortwave radios, and then if you were a minister in the Buddhist religion, you were automatically taken. And so were the president of the Japanese Association, and also most of the ex-presidents. And I say most because my father was one of the ex-presidents of the Japanese Association. And so when we heard that the rest of the leaders of the community in the Japanese Association were being taken by the FBI, we expected them to come for our father too. So we had his bag packed and a suitcase packed and ready to go at any time. But they never did show up.
It must have been a very scary period for you.
It was, because we were on curfew. We had to be in our homes by 8 o'clock. We couldn't go outside after 8 o'clock. And we couldn't leave the city limits during the day either. And we were limited in miles, and just about everything that we were free to do, we couldn't do anymore.
And when you say these leaders were arrested, were they actually put in a jail?
Yes, they were taken, not a jail, but into a camp where they were incarcerated for almost the duration of the war.
Was this in that Salinas barracks?
No, that they were taken to, there were quite a few places like Crystal City in New Mexico and Texas, and I can't remember where the other camps were located.
Were they separated from their families?
Yes, because only that person was taken. But later on, they brought the family to them if they wanted the families with them.
And what about your parents? What reactions were they having to all this?
Well, they were kind of apprehensive, and they didn't know what to do really, because they couldn't go any place, and we had all just wait until we had orders to go to camp.
What about people like in your family that Japanese American Protestants? Were those leaders taken off too?
Yes, if there was any kind of indication that they had their allegiance to Japan, and the way I guess the FBI determined that was all the memorabilia that was found in the homes, and but mostly, as far as the ministers are concerned, the Buddhist ministers were the only ones taken. Because our minister, I remember, he wasn't taken, but until later on when we all went to camp.
As you were going to school, did you have any friends in the white or black community? I mean, outside the Japanese American community?
Yes, we did.
And did those relationships change at all after all this threat of camps came up?
Well, I really don't know because I didn't have any, not being in school at that time, I didn't have any contact with them after I left school, so I don't know. But as far as I was concerned, the only prejudice I really knew was that the whites were either economically afraid or whatever of the Japanese, because the Japanese did all the farming in our area, and in fact in the whole West Coast.
Did you know whether there was any, open reaction or any protest from the Japanese American community to all this?
No, because we didn't have any support to back us up. Now, Salinas was a very bad area because my friends, in fact, all of my brothers had friends that were in the National Guard at that time. And there was 6 years in a row where we had, or 5 years in a row where we had one of my family, my brothers or sister, was in a class. And so it was every year they had a takeshita in the schools. So our family was fairly well known in Salinas, but I don't know if that had anything to do with my father not being taken, but it's a possibility.
By the way, did you know any Jewish people as you were growing up?
At that time, it didn't dawn on me that the Jewish people were separate from others. And we didn't find that out until it was around 1943 when I went into service. And in going to Mississippi, where our training camp was, I came across segregated bathrooms, water faucets, everything was segregated. I couldn't understand. Gee, this says black and white, black and white. So what am I supposed to be considered as? Well, so he says, oh, okay, I'm white anyway, so we'll go to white. But, and then I heard about the Jewish people that were being discriminated against in the East Coast. And that's, I just heard little about that at that time. But after I came back from the war and I relocated back to the West Coast again and I went to school in Berkeley, my wife was working at the university at that time, and she had some Jewish friends that were working with her. And they told us about the discrimination that they encountered back east. And that was the first time that I had ever really heard of the type of discrimination that they were going through. And it was really bad.
Did it feel similar to what you had?
Yes, similar. Because when my wife, in 1940, I believe it was 1944, her sister, her older sister, had gone to Cleveland because they were letting out the Japanese Americans whenever they had a chance to go to some family that was that would take care of them. And so this one family, a doctor's family in Cleveland, had asked for my wife's sister if she could come and be like a house girl for them. And so in order to leave the camp, she says, "Why, sure, I'll do that." So she went to Cleveland, and they found her a job, and so she worked in the home whenever she had time, and in order to pay for her room and board, and then she worked in her regular hours. And her father says, "Hey, I want to send my younger daughter to finish high school," because she was going to go into her senior year. So they sent her to Cleveland.
And this is with white families, I
Yes,
think.
yes, with a fight.
So automatically they became loyal if they were working for a white family.
I guess I don't know how they take that, but I guess that's the way it was. But the incident occurred where when she was walking to school one day, this was after she enrolled in the school, and or maybe a couple of weeks later, she got to know a few of the students. And one of the girls was lived fairly close to where they were, so she used to walk to school with her. And one day, while she was in class, one of the other girls came up to her and says, "Hey, don't go walking with her." And so she says, "Why?" And so she's a Jew. And that was the first time my wife had ever come across any kind of discrimination outside of herself. And that was the first incident she had. And then she got a lot more information while she was working at the university about how the Jews were treated.
Well, maybe you could describe what happened back there in 40 and 41 as people were becoming, or getting arrested or sent to these camps. How did it proceed in your family?
Well, nobody was taken in my family, but my brother had his business, his optometry office, and my sister had her beauty shop, and they would work in normal business hours, but they couldn't stay open longer than 8 o'clock. But everything seemed to be normal except for the curfew and everything. But the general sentiment in Salinas at that time was very bad because of the National Guard unit that was that had so many of our friends. Because our age group was around the age group that were in the National Guard. And it was the 40th Tank Company in Salinas. And they were sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, right after Pearl Harbor. And just before the Japanese captured the Philippines, the National Guard from Fort Lewis were in the Philippines at that time, and they were captured at that time. And so there were a lot of my friends and my brothers and so on, all their friends were in the Philippines at that time. And so the parents of these National Guardsmen that lived in Salinas were really hostile, and they wanted to get us out of Salinas and put us in the camps and whatever. And it was this kind of pressure that made Washington make the decision to. At least that was my opinion.
The parents of the white young men who were in the National Guard?
Right, and they were sent to Fort Lewis, where they trained for a while, and then they went to the Philippines. And so they were all captured in the Philippines. And some were, I don't know how many, but there were quite a few that was caught in the death march in the Philippines. And so the sentiment from the Salinas parents were real hostile against us.
And so the government did go ahead and try to round up all the Japanese Americans and
Well, they did. See, there was an executive order 9066 that was issued. It was early in 1942, I believe it was, where it was officially designated that all Japanese Americans all Japanese on the West Coast, regardless of whether you're citizens or not, were to be interned in camps that were designated.
And how would this affect you and your family?
We all had to go to this Salinas camp on the Rodeo grounds in the Assembly Center, and that was only a temporary camp. They were building, I think it was 10 camps in the United States, from California to Arkansas, and they picked the most desolate areas that they can find to build these camps. And they had it was all barbed wire fenced, and they had guard towers on each corner. And the Americans used to tell us, well, those towers were up there so that they can protect you people in the camp. So our argument was that then why were the guns pointed inward and not outward? Because anytime a person went close to the fence, they were warned to stay away from the fence. In fact, there was one old man who was very hard of hearing, and he didn't hear the guards say anything, and he was just standing by the fence, and the guard shot him.
Killed him?
Right, for no reason at all, just because he was near the fence. Says, well, I told him to get away from the fence, but he was hard of hearing, and he just didn't hear you.
And so he killed him and no repercussions?
No repercussions.
What about your home? Did you own your own home?
No, we were leasing the home.
So you just moved out?
Yes, let's see, my folks had, I think we had a 10-year lease on that house at that time. And we had a real estate agent in Salinas take care of the property. And he rented it out, and we were supposed to get the receipts from the rental, but every month it seemed that there was something wrong with the house, so that money went into the repair, and we never saw a penny of that money.
And you had already paid your rent for the 10 years?
No.
Did you have to keep paying rent?
No.
No.
See, that's why we had to get the real estate agent to take care of it and rent it out, and so they can pay for the mortgage.
And what about all your belongings?
Our church had a gymnasium, and so all the members of the church was allotted a spot on the gymnasium floor. We had it marked off for each family, and you can put your possessions in that spot, and whatever you could put in there. Naturally, you couldn't put beds and things like that in there because you didn't have enough room. But whatever you could, we put in there. But I think the only thing we got out of that, whatever we had stored, was a refrigerator. All the rest things were looted from that.
Who looted them, do you know?
We never know. Somebody from Salinas.
Because there were no Japanese Americans left to watch over?
No. We had in Salinas, at that time, there were 2 black families. And one was a church leader in our church. And he kind of looked after the building, but being just one man, black man at that, it didn't make any difference because he couldn't do anything.
And what about all your furniture?
Most of it is all gone.
Were you able to sell any, or you just had to?
Well, most of it we left in the house for whoever was going to rent the house.
And when you came back, was any of it left?
We didn't come back because we actually had nothing to come back to.
And what about your father's business?
My father was on the verge of kind of retiring, like semi-retirement, because my sister had taken half of his shop when she opened up her beauty shop. And then when my oldest brother got out of school and he wanted to open up his optometry office, he took the other half and he kind of forced my father to move into the back where he had the back part fixed into a shop for himself. So everything that he had in there, we just lost everything, that's all.
And what about the beauty shop and the optometry office?
Most of that, I don't know what my sister did with hers. It's possible she could have sold it to somebody before we left, but not having enough time to put in ads or whatever, you're lucky to get 10 cents out of the dollar on anything.
How much time did you have?
Oh, it was about a couple of weeks.
And what kind of work or whatever were your other brothers doing?
The second brother was a diesel mechanic, and he worked for a company in San Francisco. And when the war broke out, he happened to be in Dos Pelos near Sacramento, and he had his truck, and he was loading rice onto the truck. And when they put the curfew on the Japanese Americans, then he had to come back home because it's over 100 miles from where he lived. And the third brother, he was working out the fields with us too, with myself, because he had gotten out of junior college the year before I did, but he didn't have the money to go to a university, so he was working to save some money too.
And tell, what are the names of your brothers and your sister?
My sister's name is Toshi. Well, we call her Toshi, but her full name is Toshiko. Ko designating that it's a girl. And my oldest brother's name was Masao. And the next brother was Shigeo. And then the next one was Saburo. The reason is Saburo because San is the third, number 3. So it's the third son. And my name is Shiro, which is the 4th son. Shi is 4th in Japanese. And then my youngest brother was Goro. Go is 5 in Japanese. So that's the 5th son. Now the 6th one was a baby. His name is Norio. But for 27 days, I mean, that's all he lived. So.
Was your younger brother still in school at that time?
Yes, he was the only one that was in school. He was in high school at that time.
So you had just those 2 weeks to organize your whole life,
Yes.
give up everything.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of goods were you allowed to take with you?
Just what you can carry. 1 suitcase and the clothes on your back.
Did you go along with any people you knew, any friends?
Oh yes, the whole town went. I mean, the whole Japanese community in Salinas. The Assembly Center in Salinas took all the Japanese in the coast counties, Monterey, Carmel, Watsonville, Santa Cruz, and inland to Hollister, San Juan, Gilroy. I guess that was about it. It was all in the coast counties.
And what were the living conditions like there in Salinas?
You mean in the barracks and
Yes.
There are no partitions. You had to put sheets onto the. Oh yes, there were partitions. That's right, but the ceiling was open. It was just a thin partition to designate where the apartment, how much of an apartment you had. And we had, at that time, my brother just above me was already in the service. He was drafted in 1941, in the early part of 41.
Before you went to the camp?
Before we went to the camp. So there were 7 of us left. And we had one small apartment, so-called apartment, that was the end barracks were the largest, and so that's where they put us.
About
But
how many rooms would you say you had?
one,
One room
right?
for all of you?
Yes, they were divided. The rooms in the barracks, say this was the end barrack, it's the largest. The next barrack was small, and then the last one was a little larger again. And in order to partition the room yourself, you used bed sheets. And because all you had were cots for beds.
So basically that was just a sleeping area.
That's right. Well, that's your living area too. I mean,
You had to like spend the evenings there. And
right.
did you have any more space than just a room for a cot or so?
No, very little, because those barracks weren't that big. I can't remember how many so-called apartments they had in it. I think there were 5. I think it was 5 was maximum.
So it was very cramped.
Very cramped, yes.
And how about the food?
The food was supplied by the mess hall. We had a washroom with scrub boards, and your latrine was a community latrine that was next to the washroom, and the kitchen served so many in a block. Now the camp was divided so that there were so many barracks to a block, and each block had the washroom and the latrine and the mess hall, and everybody went to the mess hall to eat, and you had your own cooks and whatever.
Who were the cooks? Were the cooks from the Japanese American
Yes,
community?
yes.
So they were able to cook food you were familiar with?
Well, yes, later on. But in the beginning, we had hardly any food.
Were you hungry?
No, we didn't go hungry, but if you didn't eat what they served, for 1 week, for 1 full week, we had nothing but sardines. You know those oval canned sardines? Morning, noon, and night. Because that's all the ration that they had for us at that time. Then later on, they brought in vegetables and meat and things like that.
And so this food was furnished by the American government?
Government, yes.
You didn't have to pay for it?
No. No.
And you presumably had enough to eat. You didn't feel hungry, or did you? It was a familiar food, though, at first.
Well, if you like sardines, you're all right.
And what about the bathing facilities?
They had showers, but they're community showers again.
And how about any schooling for the young children?
We had schools in the barracks.
Was this something the government set up, or did you have to provide this yourself?
No, they, as far as the schools were concerned, we used barracks that were open for the schools. And I don't know if the government provided those extra barracks or not, but they were empty, so they used them as schools.
And were people assigned to any kind of jobs or?
Yeah, well, you signed up for whatever you wanted to do in the camp itself.
Could you be without a job if you wanted to?
Yes, yes.
Did you sign up for a job or an activity?
Yes, I signed up for athletics.
And what did you do?
We formed baseball, football, any kind of league that to organize sports. See, at first we didn't have this when we first went into camp, and we were playing baseball or softball, and with no organization, kids from say 8, 9, 10 years old up to young adults were playing on the same field at the same time. And this one boy, I happened to be playing at that time, and we were just playing informal softball at that time. And he was killed on that ball field. He was he was a pitcher, and it was just an underhand ball game. And the batter had happened to hit a fly ball between the catcher and the pitcher. And the catcher went after the ball, and he went after the ball, and they collided. Now the catcher was about 19 years old, and this young boy was about 10, and his head came up to about the fellow's mouth. And when they collided, his head just snapped back, and he ended up with a blood clot in his head. But he was afraid to go back to his own barrack where his father was, because he wasn't supposed to be out playing ball, and he was afraid he was going to get reprimanded for that. So he went into one of the, being that it was a rodeo ground, they had stables all around. And he went into one of the stables and was laying down on the straw. And he was complaining of migraine headaches. And it was at night when he didn't come back to his barrack that his father got worried, and they said, "Hey, where's my boy?" And everybody said, "Oh, he was playing baseball." So they went to look for him, and they found him in the stall, and he was sleeping in there. And then they woke him up, and he says, "Oh, he's got a headache, terrible headache." So they took him to the infirmary, or so-called infirmary, and the doctor that we had there examined him, and he said, "Well, we got to get this boy to the hospital." And so they called the ambulance. And it's kind of a problem, because once you get into the camp, it's hard to leave. But in an emergency like this, there are some people that go by the book, and we can't take him out. And it delayed so long. By the time they got to the hospital, he had an hemorrhage and he died. So from that day on, they said, we've got to have things organized. So we're going to have organized leagues and whatever. If you want to play baseball, we'll have from 8 to 10 years old, 11 to 14, or whatever age groups, so that they'll all be about the same age. And that's when we really started to organize different teams.
How about the medical care if you needed something?
Well, we had our own doctors too, so as long as they had the facilities, we were all right. Like the dentists too, they had, of course, if they had their equipment, there was no problem. Because the Japanese community had enough Japanese Americans that were either doctors or dentists and optometrists and whatever.
But they would have needed equipment or medication.
That's right. That's all. Right.
Were they able to get that to serve the community?
Yes. Yes.
Could you get any kind of jobs that would actually pay you anything if you wanted to?
They paid us in the camp, but I think the maximum, the professionals or doctors and so on, were paid $16 a month, and semis were paid 12, I think it was, and I think it went to 8, 12, and 16. This is the way they paid us.
And what about your other brothers, your sister, and your father? Did they take on any work or any activities?
My father didn't do anything in Assembly Center. It took him a while to get back to work, but there were actually plenty of jobs open because you had to have people working in the mess halls, and since this Assembly Center was just a temporary, and we only stayed 3 months in these assembly centers.
How did your parents react? I mean, did they accept it or did they feel depressed about it?
No, they accepted it, and it's... see, the Japanese have a saying. It says, "Shikata ga nai." It can't be helped. I mean, that's the way it is, and you make the best of it. And I think the Japanese were one people that always took advantage of what they had and made the best out of it.
How did you spend, say, your evenings or any other free time?
Oh, usually doing some kind of sports or something, playing baseball, playing catch, and things like that.
Well, you were a young man. Did you have any lady friends at that point?
Well, at that time, no, not really. I mean, what could you do? I mean, not a truly girlfriend, but we had friends that we tried to organize dances and things like that, but
could you have any contact, letters or whatever, with people outside the camp?
yes, I think so. I didn't, unless you had real close Caucasian friends, you didn't have anybody to write to.
What about people in other camps?
That was a possibility, but you had no address at that time until you found out where they were.
So you say you were there for about 3 months, and then what happened?
And then they took us to the permanent camps.
And where's that?
Our camp, the Salinas Assembly Center, went to Poston, Arizona. That's right on the Colorado River. And we left on July the 4th, 1942. And the temperature in Salinas was 68 degrees. When we got to Arizona, the temperature in the shade was 120.
You were totally unused to such kind of...
That's right. And and people were dropping like flies.
Passing out?
Passing out. It was terrible. To make it worse, we had people making speeches before we got off the bus about we're all in it together and all this, and they, but it was terrible. But what made it worse was that the camp wasn't ready for occupation, and there wasn't enough water. The toilets wouldn't flush because the water pressure was too small. And in Arizona, this was in a kind of a desert area, but there were nothing but mesquite trees there. And the camp itself was cut out in the mesquite trees. They dug out all the mesquite trees and made the camp right there. But it was very sandy soil. And so every time they had a dust storm, the barracks weren't made too well, and the floors had cracks in them about anywhere from a quarter inch to half inch. And the sand would blow in from the bottom. And the ceilings and all had been caked with dust, sand, about an inch thick. But you didn't have any water to wash it off or anything. All we can do is brush it, and whenever you brush it, it's just like a full dust storm. And those are the conditions that we had to live in the beginning, and that was really bad. See, because the only water we had was a canal that was going through the camp, and they had to turn the water off at certain hours because there just wasn't enough water for everybody to use. And so that was the biggest problem as far as when we got into camp. And also the toilets wouldn't flush because there's not enough water.
Did the water situation ever improve?
It improved later on, yes, but not to the full extent.
How did you deal with that, with not being able to flush the toilets?
Well, we couldn't do anything about it. We had to wait until they turned the water on and try to flush it then.
How about the size of your living space? Was that any different than what you had before?
It was a little bit, I think it was a little bit bigger than the one in the Assembly Center, but not much. It wasn't much bigger.
What about all the other aspects, like the food or the...
Everything was the same. I mean, as far as you had your... each block had so many barracks to it. And then within that barrack, within that block, you picked your own so-called block manager, we call them. And we had our own community latrines, community shower, and a community washroom, and then the mess hall. And in these relocation camps, it was surrounded by barbed wire fence, and they had these guard towers. They had the guard towers in Salinas too, but they didn't have the barbed wire fence around because they put this cyclone fences around the camp. And they had American GIs in these towers with their rifles.
You mean white GIs?
Yes.
Were you afraid that people would shoot?
If you got close to the fences, yes. Because the ones that were chosen for that kind of job, they weren't too well educated, and they, in fact, a lot of them didn't know how to read.
Was there any other kind of intimidation of you in these camps?
No, not really. The guard tower was the biggest intimidation.
Were you able to keep practicing your religious practices for you and your family?
Yes, they had a barrack open for whatever church denomination you had. They had Protestant churches and they had Buddhist churches also.
How were you able to get, say, new clothing if you needed it or whatever?
Montgomery Ward's, Sears,
Catalog? And what did you do for money?
If you didn't have any, you just went without, and you depended on the government for clothes rations or whatever. Now, I didn't stay in the camp long enough to know the full story about the camp. I know they had a what they call it, not a PX, but like a commissary store, I guess, where the government furnished coupons or whatever to buy certain things, and the ones that didn't have money to order whatever they needed, they can get it at the this commissary. And I don't know if they had clothing there or not. I imagine they did have, because there were so many that didn't have any money to buy any clothes.
If, say, you had your own money, I guess, say, a bank account before you were interned, could you buy things like for your own hobbies, say, you know, if you wanted to knit, could you send out for yarn or
Yes,
something like that?
yes, you can.
How about a library of sorts?
I don't know if at the time I left Poston, I don't recall seeing a library. In fact, we didn't have a school at that time. We used an empty barrack at that time for whatever schools that they needed. But I remember that was one of the first things they built there, by us. And being in Arizona, you used adobe for walls, for insulation. And all I remember is before I left the camp to go into the service, each block had to make adobe bricks. And it's working out in 120 degree temperature, it made it pretty rough, but we made enough bricks anyway to build a school. Now, I never did see that school because I left before things were completed.
Had you been in touch with your other brother who was already in the service?
Yes,
And
yeah, they used to, my parents used to get letters from him.
And what was his situation? Was he in an all Japanese American unit?
No,
or
no, they had no such thing.
No such thing.
No such thing.
So there he was integrated in the regular army.
Right.
And had he been sent overseas, or was he in combat, or?
No, he was in Camp Robinson in Arkansas at that time, and he was a bugler. Well, buglers were hard to find in the service because everybody hated buglers. But then he was transferred to Camp Tyler, Texas. What I don't understand is there were quite a few Japanese Americans that were in the service at that time. Now, I would estimate half of them were discharged after Pearl Harbor and reclassified as 4C.
Which means?
1A is your draft status, is you're eligible for the draft. 4C is you're an enemy alien. And these were citizens of the United States. And that's just like me too. I was changed from a 1A to a 4C.
When were you changed?
While I was in camp.
While you were in the camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they had no legal recourse to do anything about this?
No. No. All we they could quote was an executive order 9066 that put us in these camps, and that's it.
And what about the other half of Japanese Americans who were not reclassified?
They were in the service. A lot of them went to MIS, Military Intelligence School, and they were sent to the Pacific.
So is that the only thing that distinguished the two groups?
What do you mean by two
Well,
groups?
you said, one half were kept in the service and made use of it this way, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know
and then
why.
The other half are
No, because there are a lot of GIs that were discharged that could speak good Japanese, and they could have been very helpful in the Pacific. So I don't know what rationale the government used in discharging some of them and keeping the others.
And have you ever found out anything?
No, I haven't. But I know they didn't trust them at that time.
Were they sent to camps also after discharge?
Yes, because they couldn't, unless, if they happen to live east of, was it Nevada? East of Nevada? As long as they weren't in California, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and I guess those are the four major. Actually, the Western Defense Command is what eliminated you for evacuation.
Was there ever an option, say, for people to move more to the Midwest or the East rather than going to camp?
Yes, but most of the people didn't have the time or the money to move. There are quite a few that did move, but in such a short time, they would have had to find a place to go to, which was the hardest part. And the others didn't have enough time to, if they had a business, they didn't have time to close their business and so on.
And so what finally happened for you that you went into the Army? How did that come about?
Well, while we were in the camp, our national organization, which is the Japanese American Citizens League, our leaders were also in camp. And they got together and they said, we got to petition the government and letting the Japanese Americans, or at that time we were called Niseis. Ni means second, and Sei is the generation, second generations that were born in America who were automatically American citizens by birth. And they said, we shouldn't be in this camp, we should be out fighting for our country. But the government doesn't trust us, and they don't think we're loyal enough. So they says, we got to petition the Washington to allow us to form our own unit then, and then let us serve in the U.S. Army and find out if we are loyal or not. And this went on for a few months. And in the meantime, there were a lot of opposition to this also in the camps themselves, especially the ones that were born here, but went back to Japan, were educated in Japan, and then came back to the United States. Well, they spoke more Japanese than they did in English. And they says, no, why should we go? I mean, they put us in these camps. So there was a pretty big controversy for a while, but our leaders finally prevailed, and they kept urging Congress to let us Niseis volunteer for the service and prove our loyalty. And so the government finally says, okay. Says, we'll let you volunteer from the camps then. And so,
Were you pleased about that or not? Or?
oh yeah, I was pleased. Right, because otherwise you're still disloyal, according to the government. And even the GIs that were in the service at that time, they still considered them disloyal also.
Even in the service?
Even in the service. Because I remember in Fort Riley, Kansas, I had a friend from Monterey who was in the service at that time, and he was stationed in Fort Riley. President Roosevelt was making a tour of these Army camps, and he was scheduled to go to Fort Riley, Kansas. At that time, they took all the Japanese American GIs in uniform and put them in the Huska, or in the Huska, until the president came and left, and then they let him out again. Now that is really something that your dignity is gone. I mean, you're in the service and you still have to follow orders like that. That really doesn't make sense.
You were made a criminal.
That's right.
And was it to be presumed that if you had this fighting unit, that this would be something positive for your families as well?
Yes, definitely. Because it helped. Well, as you know, the record of the 442nd was astronomical, and without that support from people that knew about the 442nd, the Japanese Americans, when they went back to the West Coast, they would never have survived. I mean, they would have. It would have been a not a massacre, but I mean, you wouldn't be able to live peacefully, because even in 1945, when they were allowing inmates from these concentration camps to return to California and Washington and Oregon, when they got to their homes, they were threatened, and they had graffiti on their homes and whatever, and they were threatened with death by the citizens around there.
Did this happen to your family?
No, because my family didn't go back to California. So we didn't have anything to go back to.
That's right, you said.
Yeah, because, but the ones that did go back, they had either their property back home, if it was kept intact for them, or they had a business that, like this rice farmer. He was the biggest, they called him the Rice King in Dos Palace, and he lost 2/3 of his property, which was over a couple of thousand acres. And he never did get it back.
Never, ever.
Never.
And so your eldest brother, who was already in the service, he is not either in the intelligence, but he was kept
No,
on because he's a bugler.
Right. But then he was transferred to Texas, and he petitioned to volunteer for the 442nd.
Was that first original unit?
Yes, that was the 442nd and the 522nd and the 232nd engineers. We were all one unit.
You were all one unit.
Right, yeah.
And so that was formed all at the same time,
Right.
when the government allowed this time.
Right.
And when was that exactly? Or more or less even?
Around March, April of 1943. March, April, and May.
And
Yep.
were your parents and brothers and sisters happy for you to?
Well, they didn't show any emotions or anything. I mean, they knew I was old enough to know what I was doing, and they left it at that. But I was one of the first ones to leave, in the first group to leave from Poston. And they had a big kind of a send-off for the first group. There were about 20 of us. See, Poston had 3 camps, Poston 1, Poston 2, and Poston 3. And they were all 3 miles apart. And so the volunteers from the Camp 3, they had their ceremony in Camp 3, and then the truck brought them over to Camp 2, and we had our short ceremony there, and then the camp went to Camp 1, and then that's where the bus took us to the train. Being that we were the first ones to leave, I mean, that's why they had that kind of a celebration like. And they asked for volunteers from the camps, but they didn't get enough volunteers that they wanted, and which is understandable, because there are so many that said, no, they don't trust us. Look at where they put us in camp. Why should we volunteer? And so they asked for volunteers from Hawaii. And the first contingent from Hawaii, they received over 10,000 volunteers. So they sent what they needed for the regimental combat team. They sent them over to the Camp Shelby, and they, together with the internees from the camp, we joined at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. And I got to Camp Shelby in May 21st of 1943. And we trained there until end of the year, and went on maneuvers, and then we went overseas.
And so did you become part of the 522 right away when you entered?
Yes, they had us assigned already when we got in.
And what kind of a job was the 522 going to be assigned in the Army? Did you know that? What sort of position we were going to have? Regular fighting soldier? Or?
No, see, the artillery has, we have the A battery, B battery, and C battery. Those are the 3 gun batteries with howitzers, and each one has 4 howitzers. So the men manned each one of those howitzers, and there was a complement of about a little over 100 in each battery. And we're assigned different jobs. Some are radio men, some are wiremen, some are machine gunners, some are the gunmen on the howitzers themselves, and it takes about a little over 100 men to man that.
And you were in C battery?
I was in C battery.
And what was your role?
I was a machine gunner.
So you were manning a gun?
Well, actually, the main part of the artillery are the howitzers, and those are the big guns that we had. And my machine gun, every time we went into position, I was assigned one of the flanks, and I was supposed to dig in and protect the flanks of the guns. And
were any of your other brothers interested in joining the Army?
Well, the second brother volunteered when he was in 1941, but he had diabetes, and so he was rejected 4F, which is you're automatically not included. You're an American citizen, but you're not physically able to join. But after they allowed us to volunteer, then after we went into combat and we needed replacements, we needed Nisei replacements because it was an all Japanese American unit. and they drafted my brother, even though he was 4F.
And your other brother?
He was still in Camp Robinson.
Still?
In Tyler, Texas.
He was still playing the bugle.
Right, and he was still trying to transfer into the 442nd.
Hmm. And you had one other brother, and was he old enough, or
He was the last one to go in.
he went too?
Yes, he went into service,
Yes.
but he didn't go overseas.
So you had altogether
4 boys in the service.
in the service.
2 of us were in Europe.
So when you were sent overseas, where did you land first?
We landed in Bari, Italy.
And was that a combat area?
No, it wasn't. The combat area was between Naples and Rome. It was up about maybe a third of the way up towards Rome. And so we were assembling. The 442nd was assembling in Naples. So we were on different ships going overseas. And we were supposed to meet in Naples at a certain time. Because some of the 442nd went to Sicily and then to Naples. But before all of this happened, there was a National Guard unit in Hawaii called the 100th Battalion. And the U.S. government wanted to see how they would do in combat. And so while we were still training in Italy, they sent them overseas first. And they wanted to see what the reaction would be from the Japanese Americans in how they acted in combat. And that one battalion, they just outdid themselves, and they made such an outstanding record that they says, okay, this 442nd is going to go overseas as a group. And that 100th Battalion became our first battalion in the regiment. So the regiment has 3 battalions of infantry, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalion. And then they have also 1 battalion in reserve. And 1 battalion of artillery, which was us, 1 company of engineers, and 1 anti-tank company, and 1 cannon company. But that made up the whole regiment. And I believe the complement of the regiment was about 6,000 or 7,000. I'm not sure about what the total is, but.
So did you go to Naples then after that?
Yes, we took when we landed in Bari, it just so happened that it took us the longest to get to 26 days from Newport News, Virginia. All of us left from Newport News at the same time. And a lot of the others, the other ships, got there within 3 weeks. So it took us about 5 days longer because we had to go around the boot of Italy onto the Adriatic Sea side. And when we got to Bari, we had to take a 40x8 train. You know those freight trains? They used to call them 40x8s. And we went straight west from Bari to Naples. And that's where we assembled with the whole regiment.
And then what did you do?
And then after we got regrouped there, then we started to go up to the where the combat zone was. And where we were going, we don't know, because headquarters of each battalion has all the information. See, all the higher officers are in your headquarters. and they get all the information on where your men are supposed to go. And we just follow the orders of what our headquarters tells us.
And so you finally, I guess, met up with some enemy.
Yes, well, we were there to replace troops that were already in combat. So we had to replace some regiment that was already up in there.
And did you do that?
Yes, uh-huh.
And were you in fighting at that point?
Yes.
And who and what were you fighting? I mean,
We were fighting Germans and Italians.
both.
Right,
Trying to take territory?
right. We're moving up north of France, of Italy.
Mm-hmm. And how did that battle go?
Well, it was rough because not being used to combat to begin with, and fighting in Italy was really tough because it's just hills and valleys.
And so I guess you took some positions at that point? Were you
Yes, we advanced constantly.
Constantly.
We constantly advanced, yes.
So everything you were doing obviously was quite successful.
Yes.
Were you taking prisoners?
Not in the artillery, but the infantry did take some prisoners, yes.
At that point, did you know, what the German plan for the Jews was in Europe and the camps?
No, we had no idea what was going on in Germany at that time.
Had you been getting any news of that back in the United States in the newspapers, or
No.
no?
The only news that we received while we were overseas was Stars and Stripes. That's the Army newspaper.
And so I guess you just continued your advance.
Yes.
And you, I presume, eventually got to Germany itself.
Well, no, it wasn't really that way. We moved us up north as far as Pisa, and the artillery were always behind the infantry, a few miles behind them, and so I actually didn't get into Pisa itself, but I looked through one of those binoculars and I could see the Leaning Tower. That's as close as I got to Pisa. And then we had orders to go to southern France. So they pulled us all back, and I can't remember what port we went to, but they loaded us on these small ships. They were English ships, and very small. And they shipped us to southern France, and we went to Marseille and landed in Marseille in the port there. And then from there we moved up to, I can't remember what the combat zone was, but it was up in the middle of France, the eastern part of mid-east France, I believe. And we got in combat at that time, and we kept moving up from there. And when we got to the Vosges Mountains, that's where our infantry, or in fact our regiment, came across the Lost Battalion. And
Talk about that.
well, our Lost Battalion was, we were attached at that time to the 36th Division. And the 36th Division was moving up north, and they came to the Vosges Mountains, and they had 3 battalions up in the front lines. But one battalion was a little bit too, what would you call it, aggressive, and they moved up too fast. And the Germans saw this, and they says, hey, I see these guys are getting separated from the 1st Battalion and 3rd Battalion. We'll let them come up a little bit further, and then we'll encircle them. And that's exactly what happened. Well, this General McDougall was the commanding officer of the 36th Division, and they tried, I can't remember how long they tried to get them out of there, but they couldn't do it. And so they called the 442nd Regiment, and they says, come on, let's get my boys out of there. And so the 442nd went in, and within a couple of days or whatever, I can't remember how much time it took, but they rammed their way in, and they got to the Lost Battalion. But it was costly because we had a 67% casualty rate.
In the Lost Battalion or in both groups?
No, just in our 442nd.
Just in your 442nd?
Just in the 442nd. And they got to them all right, but it was a costly battle. And that's where they received a lot of the citations and medals and individual medals and whatever. And so, since we needed Nisei replacements, Japanese Americans, and there weren't enough available, after we got the Lost Battalion out, then they sent us back to Nice, France.
Why weren't they replacing the casualties with these extra Hawaiians who had volunteered?
Well, the Hawaiians and we're all the same.
Oh, I thought you had said that there were so many volunteers of the Hawaiians they weren't all needed at the first.
Well, they didn't think they were going to need them, but they found out that there weren't enough from the camps to fill the complement of a regiment. So that's why they called for volunteers from Hawaii.
And they did then use all the Hawaiians that volunteered.
Yes, eventually they were all used. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you were saying that they needed more Nisei.
Right. Well, what they did was they drafted them from the camps after that. That's when my brother went into from camp. And then my youngest brother also went in later on. But
was that brother with you in your 522?
No, he was in the infantry. He was in the 100th Battalion. But even before they got to the Vosges Mountains, they were fighting their way all the way up at that time, and that's when they liberated the town of Bruyères and Bifontaine, and it was a combat deal all the way through up to the Lost Battalion, and that was the final battle in France because of the casualties that we incurred. And so they says, well, we'll send you down to the what they call it, the Champagne campaign back in Nice, France, where you could protect the border of France and Italy up in northern Italy. Only we were on the French side, and we could see the movement in the Germans on the Italian side, and we couldn't understand one thing. We had our command post right on the coast in this hotel. It's a big hotel, but outside the wall, there's a concrete fence, and we had our telephone lines right outside the fence going into the hotel, and in order to keep contact with headquarters that was the infantry headquarters. And we couldn't understand what was going on, because every time a jeep would go by that wall, right after he'd go by, they'd get a mini barrage. And that showed that the Germans were watching that wall to see if there was any activity. And every so often, when they see that, they would put a barrage in there. And but anyway, we stayed there for 3 months, waiting for the replacements. And when they finally did come, this was in early part of 1945, and they sent the 1st Battalion of the 442nd, they sent them back to Italy, simply because they were going to join the 92nd Division there, and where the 1st Battalion was going to replace the unit that was in combat right now, they were behind a little bit. So they sent the 100th a week ahead of time to push that line so that it'll be equal with the other divisions. And so when the rest of the 442nd Infantry was sent back to Italy, we thought, oh, well, I guess we're going to go too. Our headquarters got orders from General Eisenhower to move our artillery up to northern France. And so we got separated from the infantry. And they all went back to Italy, and we went back. We went back up to northern France again, because he wanted all the artillery support that that the army could get for that final push into Germany. And we were kind of sad that we had to leave our own unit, but you know, when you have orders, you have orders. And that's how we went into Germany.
Did you have any Japanese American officers in your unit?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
And what would be, say, the highest officer level that one would get to?
See, I don't know. At that time, while we were in combat, the highest, I think, was a captain at that time. But I found out later on that there were quite a few of them that stayed in the service and came out as colonels and things like that. But in the military intelligence, they had high-ranking officers also. And also in Vietnam and the Korean War.
So what happened when you were making the push to enter Germany?
Oh, we got in, I can't remember what division we were attached to or what army it was, but evidently Germany was losing a lot of their supplies, especially the fuel, because once we got into Germany, it was just a matter of time, because we were moving pretty fast, and it was by the end of April. See, we started moving up. I can't remember the exact date that we crossed the Rhine River into Germany, but by the time we got into Germany, it was April, and by the end of April, we were near Munich, and that's when we came across the concentration camp in Dachau.
And which camp was that?
All I know is Dachau. That's
Dachau.
all. Mm-hmm.
There were many sub-camps.
Sub-camps, right. All over the place. The big ones were like Auschwitz and so on. But
well, can you describe that experience of being
well,
on the camps?
See, we really didn't know what they actually were. We didn't know it was Dachau or anything at that time until after we went through it. And since we were in combat, we didn't actually go into the camp itself because we were still chasing the Germans. But it was at that time that the Germans were retreating fairly fast because they had released a lot of the Jews from the camp, the ones that were able to physically able to walk, and when they made them leave on a forced march, and the Germans wanted to go real fast because they were retreating all that time. That's why they shot a lot of the Jewish refugees, and they were strewn on the side of the road. And it was a funny thing because it had snowed in the end of April, and it snowed quite a bit. And a lot of the bodies on the side of the road were covered with snow. And that's where especially our forward observers came across this first, because they were miles ahead of us with the infantry. And they'd see these mounds on the side of the road, and they discovered that they were bodies of the Jewish refugees. Well, some of them were still alive, and they didn't move, because if they did move, they'd be shot. So they feigned their being dead and just lay there, and they got covered with snow. So by the time we got there, some of them had already gotten up and were really in bad shape. Of course, they were in better shape than the ones that were in the camp yet, because those they couldn't move, and they were still in their barracks. But they were just like skin and bones, mostly starved. And we did what we could for them at the time, because we were still in combat. And we gave them what rations we could, which was wrong. We found out later. But and then whatever blankets we had, we gave to them. And then we kept moving on.
What was your reaction when you came upon these people?
Well, I didn't realize that they were just Jewish refugees. I thought, not knowing the situation in Germany about Jews, that I didn't realize that there were Polish Jews and Czech Jews and all different nationalities of Jews. But when we saw these people, they all looked the same to us, because they had those striped uniforms, and whether they were Polish Jews or German Jews or Czechoslovakian Jews or whatever, we didn't know. But it just.
Did you think that they were prisoners of war, or what did you think?
We really didn't think anything at that time. We knew that they were prisoners of Germany, and it kind of didn't dawn on us that, gee, these are all Jews that were exterminated in the camps, because we didn't find out about the extermination until after the war was over.
Had these people dropped of exhaustion, or had they been shot?
Most of them been shot.
But some survived the shooting.
Yes.
Did you think anything of their starved nature, or would this be something you might expect from a prisoner of war situation?
No, I really didn't give it much thought. I don't know. In fact, we didn't even know that was Dachau, the camp itself, until later on. And they says, "Oh, that was one of the concentration camps in Germany." And then we started to learn more and more about who were put in these camps. And
did you actually enter the camp or any of the sub-camps?
Not at that time. After the war ended, then when we were coming back, we did drop in on the camp itself, and that's when I saw these gas chambers. Well, didn't look like a chamber. It looked just like a shower, like a massive shower area where you get a lot of people in, and they can take a shower. But what they didn't know was that when they turned the nozzle on, there was gas, or maybe it was gas was turned on by somebody, some of the Germans or whatever, that was operating that. And then we saw these rows of ovens, and they said that was where the actually they didn't have to tell us because the stench and you can still see some of the bones in the ovens themselves, where they cremated all the bodies, as many as they could.
Were there any bodies or living people left in the camp at that time, or had it been?
No, they
cleared out?
were all gone already.
Were you ever? Did you ever have opportunity to be involved with any of the Germans that were captured,
No.
or
No.
any civilians?
Oh, we talked to some civilians after the war was over. In fact, I talked to one fellow. He was a German soldier that had been discharged, and he didn't show any resentment or anything. He just an ordinary person, but. I don't know. I didn't meet too many Germans that were actually soldiers that had been discharged.
Were you getting mail from your family back at home during those months?
Yes, but not very often.
Have there been any changes in their life, or they were still in the camp? And
No, I got one letter. I think they told me my sister had found a place to go in Detroit, and she had left camp. And she got a job as a beautician in Detroit. So that would make my parents eligible to go out too, if she found a suitable apartment or whatever.
how was it that she was allowed to go out and be a beautician? Did she have to have a white family sponsor like the other people did?
They started to build what they call hostels in Chicago, Cleveland, New York, Philadelphia, areas like that, and they were allowing individuals to leave camp if they wanted to, as long as they didn't go to the West Coast.
So they were softening their policy at that
Right,
point.
right.
And your sister went. Did your parents go eventually?
Later, yes. I don't know when they went, but they went later, yes.
So for you, back in Germany, you, I guess, continued on until the war was over.
Yes.
Did you come across any other camps?
No, I didn't.
And I presume at some point you became aware of what the whole German policy
Yes,
was in
when
for
we
Jews and dissidents.
yes when we saw all these refugees walking along the side of the road, and even after the war was over, we saw quite a few stragglers here and there, and they still had that uniform. I mean that striped clothes on, and.
Were you able to talk with any of them?
Well, language barrier. That's it.
What did you make of all that once you understood what had happened?
It just shook our heads and wonder how a nation could do things. So it's unbelievable, really unbelievable. That's why I have so much respect for this Sugihara. You know, what he did. He was disgraced when he went back home. He lost his job. He lost his diplomatic status. And, of course, he was one of the luckier ones because he knew 8 different languages. And he told his his wife and his children, don't worry because I know 8 languages and I'll be able to get a job. Well, he did get a job, but it was in Russia. And he was even imprisoned in Russia for a year and a half. But the other diplomats, they had a real rough, like this Portuguese, this Sousa de Mendes.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have anything left. He lost everything. He couldn't get a job. And he probably wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for the Jewish refugees that he gave visas to.
And vice versa.
Right, that's right. Yeah, if it wasn't for him, they would have been gone, right.
When the war was over in Germany, then what happened with you?
Then everybody worries about when they're going to go home. And we kind of got stuck in Germany for a while as occupation forces because the fellows from the mainland, the internment camps, didn't have enough points to go home, whereas the Hawaiian contingent had points from being overseas. And then they came to the U.S., the mainland, but while they were living in Hawaii, they got points for being over there, and then they lost it when they came to the mainland.
You mean just for being on Hawaii Island?
Well, because it's considered overseas. See, at that time.
Wasn't a state.
That's right. So they came home before we did.
So despite all your fantastic work for the Army, you still didn't have enough points to come home again?
That's right. Well, they went by the point system because they couldn't send everybody home at one time. So we stayed in Donaworth for about a few months anyway, and we stayed there until they had computed all the points for everybody, and then gradually so many were sent home a little at a time.
Did you ever have any worry about being sent to fight against the Japanese because the war with Japan wasn't over yet? Or did you know that, or think that the U.S. government wouldn't send you a unit on such a mission?
Well, I don't think they would have sent us to Japan as far as infantry in the army or whatever. They would have sent us over if we were interpreters in the MIS. And they had asked for volunteers. And I was ready to volunteer to go to Japan or whatever, to the Pacific. But when they told me that you had to be able to read and write Japanese, then I just forgot about it because I can't read or write it. I could speak it, but not that fluently either. But the ones that did volunteer, they were sent to Fort Snelling, which is the MIS school, and then from there they would be sent to the Pacific. But I don't think very many of them got to the Pacific because I think before they got their training in Fort Snelling, I think the war was over in Japan. So if they stayed in the service, they would have gone to Japan as occupation forces, but not for combat.
And I guess, obviously, you got your points eventually, and
Yeah.
You returned. Where did you return to?
Let's see. We left. We left from France, and we had to spend Christmas and New Year's on the ship, and we landed in fact, we landed in Newport News, where we left from United States, and we went back to the same camp, Patrick Henry, where we had gone when we were going overseas. And then they shipped me to Camp Atterbury in Indiana. Now my sister had found a rental home in Highland Park, that's northern part of Detroit, and she had called for my parents to go there also. So I went to Detroit right after I got discharged from Camp Atterbury.
And when you met back up with your family again, were you able to talk about your war experiences with them?
No, we didn't talk about anything much, but I was the only one home at that time, because the brother that came up to Nice, when he went back to Italy with the infantry, he got wounded before he got up to the front lines, and he had shrapnel from his head to his toes. So he was in a cast from his chest down. And they sent a telegram to my parents saying he was wounded. And then, for some reason, when they sent him back to the States, they put him on a train to go to Oklahoma. Now, the trains aren't air-conditioned, and this was in the summertime, and the humidity and the heat in the South is terrible. And being that he was covered with plaster and Paris and all this, he almost suffocated, and they didn't think he was going to live. So they sent another telegram to my parents. But luckily, he pulled through in a hospital in Oklahoma someplace. And I was the first one to be discharged out of my family, of the four brothers.
And you had the one wounded brother, and what about the other brothers? Did they
were
survive
still
okay?
Yes, they survived, but they were still in the service. And the third brother that was in Texas, they finally gave him a transfer to the 442nd, and he was training in I think it was in Florida or Georgia. Anyway, when he was ready to come overseas, they sent him to Fort Meade to go overseas, and the group that he was with, somebody got the measles, and so the rest of the group left, and only his group had to stay behind until they got rid of the measles. Well, during that time, while he was waiting, the war ended. So he didn't have to go overseas. And of course, my youngest brother, he didn't have to go because he wasn't ready to go overseas yet. And so he spent his time in the States. But the other brother, they sent him to Fort Snelling to send him to military intelligence. But before he can get out there, the war ended in Japan, so he didn't have to go at all, and he stayed in service for almost 5 years.
Now, was it still the government's policy to keep the Japanese Americans in the camp until the end of the war with Japan?
I don't know what I really don't know when the camps were officially closed. There was an official date when they were supposed to be closed. I think it was sometime in 1945. The only problem was the people that wanted to go back to the West Coast, they were having a rough time
Why was that?
because of the sentiment against them.
Not because the government would now allow them to go back to the West Coast.
Yeah, they could go back to the West Coast now after if the camp
prejudice.
because of the prejudice, right?
What did you make of this whole thing? There you were fighting for the United States. Your family's in a camp. You see the way the Jews have been treated, the Jews and other groups treated by the Germans with their prejudices. What do you make of all that?
Well, you can't let it fester into you because that wouldn't do any good. And I take it as the Japanese take it. It can't be helped. But you try to do whatever you can to try to rectify the situation. And this is what the Jewish community, like the Holocaust Oral History Project, that's what they're doing. And anytime I could help in any way, that's why I accepted the request that to be doing whatever I can.
Well, we certainly thank you very, very much for doing that. How was your family when they were in Detroit? Do you think they were bitter about their experience?
No, I don't think so.
And what about your siblings? Did they seem to accept it pretty well too?
I don't have any children.
No, your siblings, your brothers and sisters.
Oh no, they take it the same way. I mean, it happened, and that's the way it is. And you just do what you can to make the situation as easy for yourself. And that's what we had to do in these camps. You know, they keep saying, you know, those guard towers, those are there to protect you, not for anything else. Well, if they would have gone and looked at those towers, they would see the machine guns were pointed that way inside the camp, and so were the rifles of the soldiers pointed inside the camp.
That one killing that you mentioned, is that the only one you know of?
Yes, that's the only one I ever heard of, but I'm sure there were others that maybe not killed, but might have been wounded by.
And you said when you got back, you didn't talk about your war experiences with your parents, anyway.
Right.
What about with your brothers? Did you ever talk to them about your war experiences?
No, not really, because we weren't together. See, my brother, the one that was wounded, he was a diesel mechanic. But after he got wounded, he wasn't able to work on diesels anymore because in order to work on engines, he'd have to climb on these trucks and whatever. But he's permanently disabled. And he's got they had to take some bone out of his knee, and his one leg is short, and he couldn't maneuver around enough to work. So he was on the East Coast going to a silversmith school, but he didn't end up as a silversmith or anything, but he ended up as a dental technician, because he liked to work with his hands anyway. And he moved back to the West Coast, and he worked for a couple of doctors in the Los Angeles area. And he worked with this one doctor for about 35 years. But he's retired now. And the brother that's just above me, the third one, the family had to move from Detroit because the owner sold that house that we were renting, and here my sister had to go look for a place again. So together with my oldest brother, they went to Chicago, and they found a place in Chicago. So we moved to Chicago, and so I worked in Chicago for a couple of months. Then I came to California. I came to school at Armstrong College in Berkeley. And my other brother kept applying for to go to university, and we went to. Well, in fact, both of us did. We went to Northwestern University. We went to Illinois, and we went to DePaul. All in the Chicago area, but they were all filled and they couldn't take us. So they says, well, the only way you can get in is to apply next year again. Well, I couldn't wait that long, so I left for California. And he stayed in Chicago, and he was accepted into Northern Illinois College of Optometry, so he graduated as a optometrist. So we had 2 optometrists in the family, and I came back to the West Coast and temporarily worked for the Naval Air Station in Alameda.
What did you study?
I studied accounting, business administration, but I never did go into it because the only reason I went into that was because when I was in junior college, I took up business administration, and I had gotten my AA at junior college, and so I thought I'll just continue that. So I went to that business college in Berkeley. But when I got out, jobs were hard to find because I got out in 48. In the I forgot where I left off now.
I'm going to, I remember roughly where you did, but I'm going to go back and ask you 1 or 2 questions about some of the things we were talking about.
Okay.
You left off about going to school, but you had gone to business school.
Oh.
That was roughly the time period, but I'll just start out with these other questions. I wanted to ask you, was there any reaction in Detroit when your parents first moved there? Or when your sister first moved there, even earlier?
When my sister first moved there, being only one person, it really doesn't affect the area too much. But when the neighbors heard that my parents were going to be there also, then the neighbors got kind of upset, and they sent out a petition around the block asking that we don't come there because we don't want any Orientals in our area, and they gave the petition to my sister, and she looked at it and she couldn't believe her eyes. But this was after my parents had already come there, and they were settled in the house already. And so my parents had a flag showing 4 stars, which meant she had 4 sons in the service. And so she had never intended to put that out in the window before, but now she said maybe this will make a difference. So she put that out in the window, and they never heard anything about the petition anymore after that. And I did notice when I did come home that I did notice that flag was out there.
Did any of the neighbors befriend her, your mother or your father or your sister?
No, not really. They just didn't bother, that's all.
They just tolerated it?
Right, they tolerated us.
Were there other Japanese Americans in the neighborhood?
Not in Highland Park. There were quite a few in Detroit itself. But Detroit is it's a large city spread out very, very widely. And there were quite a few Japanese in the area, but since it was such a big area, you didn't know that they were really there.
So there wasn't a big Japanese American population in the Highland Park area?
No.
What about other, like Chinese or other Oriental?
I don't know if they had. There must have been Chinese there because no matter where you go, you find a Chinese restaurant and a laundry. But we did have quite a few Japanese there because I remember when I first came back, they had a basketball league going on at that time, and I used to go watch them play, and then I finally joined in with them also.
And what about your sister? Was she getting clientele in her business from all different groups, or?
Well, no, she was working for another.
Oh, she was working for someone.
For someone, yes. It was not her own business. No.
But she did not have problems with prejudice
No.
as far as she was concerned.
No. Not that I know of, anyway.
And well, the question comes up: what about the whole Army policy and racism? I mean, clearly your unit as being restricted to nothing but Japanese Americans is no accident, shall we say.
Right. Well, while we were training in Camp Shelby, since we are a segregated unit, we had our own PXs and things, and we used to go to the other PXs also, but we never had any problems or anything, except one incident happened, or it must have been a couple of accidents, happened at the Fighting 69th PX. Of course, the Fighting 69th was a unit that is goes by their reputation from World War I, and they thought they were really something. You know, they're the Fighting 69th. Well, when the Nisei Japanese Americans went to their PX, they kind of made snide remarks, you know, about, oh, I see you got a regimental combat team. Well, we're all combat trained too, you know, this kind of thing, and the Japanese Americans didn't like any of those comments that they were making. So pretty soon they had a riot in that PX, and later they came into our PX, and then they had a riot. So they finally had to make each PX off limits to outsiders, and we just stay in our own PX area, that's all.
Do you ever remember you or any of your colleagues feeling angry at the way you had been treated?
No, not. They were angry that they got incarcerated in these camps, but it didn't show any while they were in the service. That was, all behind them, and it's something that happened, and they'll just take it with a grain of salt.
You had said, that you didn't talk about your war experiences. Was this because you felt they were painful, or that people wouldn't be interested, or that you wanted to forget them as much as possible?
No, I don't. At the time, I was the only one home, and we didn't spend too much time together because my brother was working during the day, and my sister was working. The only ones home were my parents, and not being able to speak Japanese that well, I couldn't explain a lot of the things that happened in Japanese, so I never did talk about anything.
Did they ever express curiosity about what you were
No,
doing?
not really. Just that it was that they were worried at first because anytime in war, anything can happen, and they thought it would be dangerous. But outside of that, they didn't think too much about it.
Did they ever have any intention or wishes to go back to California?
Gee, I don't know what they. I imagine they did, but it was a question of where to go to, because there again we'd have to look for a place to stay again. And when I came back to California to go to school, I never left. I stayed there all the time. And my oldest brother, opened up a shop. Well, he came to California and looked for a place to open up his business, and he found a spot in Long Beach. So he opened up in Long Beach, and he stayed there for until he retired. And my brother, just above me, stayed in Chicago and worked at, after he got out of school, he worked at Marshall Fields, and he had a little concession, I guess you call it a concession for optometrists, and he worked there until he came back to California. And the reason he came back to California was because my oldest brother in Long Beach, his business was getting too big for him, and he needed some help. So my brother, the third brother, decided, well, he'll come back to California also. But it was hard for him because he had to pass the standard board in California again. So then he had to go back to school again to brush up on the courses, whatever, in order to pass the state board. But he finally did, and he moved to California. That left only my youngest brother left in Chicago with the parents, and that's where they stayed.
That group stayed there.
Yes, my youngest brother and then my parents.
When you came back to California, what was your reception? Did you find prejudice still really strong?
Yes, I did. After I got out of school, I got married in 1950, and since my in-laws were in Alameda at the time, my wife was also Alameda born and raised, and so we started to look for an apartment in Alameda, and we'd look in the paper, and call by phone, and the person answering the phone couldn't tell whether we were Caucasian or whatever, so they would say, yes, we have an opening. And so we'd go to the apartment, and as soon as we got out of the car, they'd see that we were Japanese. And before we can get to the door, they would say, no, it's just been taken. Somebody already took we just rented it out. Well, I know they were lying because it was just about 2 minutes before we had called. And this apartment was just 2 blocks down the street and around the corner. And that's when it really hit me the hardest, because it affected me personally. And I kind of cussed at him a little bit or something, and I mentioned being in the service and things, and but it didn't faze him. He just turned around and walked back in the house, and that was that.
And did that happen often?
Yes. It happened about 2 or 3 times.
How did you cope with it? How did you decide to deal with it?
Well, in that particular incident, this family friend of my in-laws heard about it, and he says, hey, they have a basement apartment that we could rent if we wanted. So he says, oh, okay, we'll take that, because we knew we were going to have a hard time. So we stayed there for about 10 years, a little over 10 years, even though it was a basement apartment. And our church, my wife's church, had a fairly big property. So what they did was built an apartment house to supplement the income for the church. And so I was having medical problems, and I just happened to be recuperating from a major operation. So my father-in-law told my wife, why don't you move him into that a church apartment, because it's going to be brand new and it'd be a good place to go into. So my wife says, so okay. So when I got out of the hospital, I went directly to that apartment, and it was really nice, because being brand new and everything, there's nothing like having a new apartment or a new home.
And not dealing with rejection.
Right. We knew it wasn't going to be rejected because it was our church.
Were your medical problems having anything to do with your war service?
No.
And I heard you say before you didn't have any children, so
No.
it was just the 2 of you. And
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you have any trouble getting a job?
Yes, I did. In fact, my wife did too. Well, we both got out of Armstrong Business College.
Well, what's her name also?
Her name is Ikuko, but everybody calls her Cookie. But very smart. Academically, she was one of the tops. But anyway, when she got out of Armstrong, they called her in the office and told her that we can't see, because the school itself helps you in placement into different corporations or whatever. They took her in the office and said, being a Japanese American, I'm not going to be able to send you to private corporations because they won't accept the application. And so the only places that would take her were civil service, and like the university, which is a state, or cities where it's still civil service, or in the federal. So she didn't know this at the time, but they offered her a job at the university as one of the secretarial units, and they they interviewed her, and before they would hire her, she didn't know this at the time, but the supervisor told her, "Well, we'll let you know if we're going to hire you." The reason she told her no, right, not at the time that she didn't hire her at that time was because she wanted to take a poll of her crew whether they would accept her or not, and so they accepted it, and they says, "Okay, you can have the job." So she started to work for them.
And she was told that they wanted to take a poll?
No, she didn't know that.
Find that out?
She found out later. I don't know how. Somebody told her, anyway. And what really aggravated her most was, while she was going to Armstrong College, there were girls in that class that just couldn't cut the mustard, and she helped them get through the course. And those girls got jobs that paid $40 and $50 more than she did at these private corporations like Standard Oil or Shell or any big business companies that offered these secretarial jobs. And she used to tell me, you know, this girl? I helped her through her shorthand and things, whatever, and she gets a job that's $40 and $50 a month more than what I'm getting here, and this is what I have to take because that's all they have. But this is the kind of discrimination that we went through constantly in the late 40s and early 50s.
Was she able to move on from that job to something she wanted?
No. She after she stayed there for a few years, she liked academics, and she wanted to stay at the university, even though the pay was a lot less than what she could have had in the private sector. So she stuck it out, and she eventually became supervisor. And it was a feather in her cap because what she did to that secretarial office was phenomenal. That office became internationally known because of their efficiency and how that office was run. And she's a natural-born teacher, and she could tell you something 10, 15, 20 times over, and she won't get mad. She just tells you, now remember what I told you, and do this and do that, because she explains to the employee that there's nothing but big manuscripts involved, and those things can't have errors in them. And it's a rough job because they have to do a lot of footnotes because of references, and everything has to be done by the book. Otherwise, you won't be able to find the references if you don't have it in the right place.
And what department is this?
This was in the Agriculture Economics Department at the University of California.
And how about you? How did you fare when you wanted to go out and get a job?
Well, I went out looking for a job, but I'm not an outgoing person like my wife. See, she can talk and whatever, but I'm just the opposite. See, I'm more shy, and I usually don't say the right things. But I got out of college in 1948, and in January, February, and March of 1949, I couldn't find anything because I happened to get out at the time when accountants were a dime a dozen, and there just weren't any jobs.
You don't think it was any prejudices involved?
Well, there might have been, but at least I didn't. I didn't think about that. So my wife says, "Hey, why don't you try the Naval Air Station?" Because she had known about Naval Air Station, and she had worked there before she went to the school. So she got out of high school when she was 15. And when she got back to California, she turned 16. And she applied for the job at the Naval Air Station. And she told them she was 18. So she got a job temporarily, before she went to school. So she said, "Why don't you go to Naval Air Station and try?" And so when I got to the employment office at the Naval Air Station, they said, "Gee, I don't know, they're laying off people right now." That was in '49. But they said they had a timekeeper's job open that was one of the few jobs that was open. So I says, "Okay, I'll take that." She says, "At least I'll be working." So I started out as a GS2, and I was just going to work there temporarily until I got a job in accounting. But while I was still working there, I saw this announcement come out saying exams for apprentice training. So if you qualify, you can apply for apprenticeship. So I says, "Well, I got nothing to lose." So I applied with the application. I turned it in, and I at least got high enough so that I can pick my profession. And I didn't know anything as far as being at the Naval Air Station outside of any accounting. So I says, I figured the electronic field was up and coming. So I says, I want to go into electronics then. So they accepted it, and in 1951, after working 2 years in the timekeeping department, I transferred to the apprentice program, which was a 4-year apprenticeship. And then well, it's not automatic, but it's practically automatic that you would get a job as a certified mechanic after you graduate. So I stayed there until I finished the program, and in 1955 I got my mechanical rating as an electronic mechanic, and to work on the bench. And so I worked on the bench for, I forgot how many years, 10 years. And then I applied for a production controller's job. And there was still a waiting list, so I was put on the waiting list, and then I finally got that job. And I stayed on that one for another 10 years maybe. And finally there were some openings for some what they call planner and estimator. And this was for material planner and estimators. And I didn't know anything about the job, but I applied for it anyway. And while working as a production controlman, I kind of got a little information on what these planners and estimators did. And so when the opening came up, I was selected, and I worked as a planner and estimator until I retired in 1991.
So that worked out for you, and you didn't have to deal with the outside world.
That's right. That's right. But the only thing is, even in civil service, there was a lot of discrimination, not against the Japanese Americans, but against Orientals per se. I knew this was happening because mechanics on the bench were being promoted all the time because there was always transition going on, and supervisors were retiring and things. And you go by the you take a test anyway for these exams and for these positions. And according to your exams and your work experience, you get rated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Well, you could see an Oriental up there in the first, second, or third, and he never got the job. It was always somebody below. And this one fellow, as an inspector, there was a job for supervision and inspector. He was number one on that list for over 10 years. He was a Chinese fellow. And he never did get the job.
Did this affect you too in your work?
Yes, same thing.
Did anyone ever complain or challenge it or anything?
No. Because at at the time when I was working, it was getting a lot better, where you were getting a lot of backing if you did protest something. But in planning and estimating, there are very few supervisory jobs, and well, you're one of maybe 40 applying for that job, and I didn't consider myself top-notch as far as anything goes, as far as a supervisory position is concerned, but I didn't care really anyway, because I hate to work with personnel. That's the worst thing to try to do, and my wife is a master at that. She knows how to handle people.
And did the United States government ever apologize to the Japanese American people for their
Yes, they did.
treatment?
They did. In the late 1950s, our national organization, the Japanese American Citizens League, at a meeting in San Francisco, we have what we call a district council meeting, where all the chapters of the JAC, Japanese American Citizens League, have meetings every 4 months, and we discuss problems that come up. And this one fellow brought up the problem of redress. He says, and he was very vocal about it. At this meeting, he says, he demanded that this council submit to a national headquarters a program for redress, and to work on the U.S. government to provide us with $25,000 and a letter of apology for the disgraceful act that they enacted in incarcerating us, for even though we were citizens. So he says, the Germans, there are all kinds of Germans in the United States, and they were working as saboteurs. And the Italians were also in the same boat, and yet none of them were touched. He says, why should we be the only ones? So this fellow says it can't be just the that we're Japanese. It also has to do with economics, because there were a lot of people that wanted the farms that these Japanese were running, and all the businesses that they had, and because they knew that with the Exclusion Act 9066, that they didn't have enough time to sell all their belongings or whatever that they needed to go into these camps, and everybody could pick it up for a song and dance. Because my father-in-law was a gardener, and he had just bought a 1937 or 1938 Dodge, and even though it was 3 years old, he wouldn't take it out in the rain, and he very seldom used it. So there were only a few hundred miles on it. And yet he had to practically give it away because he didn't have enough time to sell it. But that's an example of what happened.
So what was the outcome of that, the pressing the government for these things?
Oh, this fellow, he set up a little outline of what we should do. And so we submitted it to the national headquarters. And at first they kind of poo-pooed it as, oh no, it says, that'll never happen. It says, we can't do that. And so our district council, which is called the Northern California, Western Nevada District Council, this fellow got really mad and he says, what's the matter with you national people? He says, they had no right putting us into these concentration camps because we're citizens. We have our rights too. But they said, well, it's not only a case of prejudice, but it's economical, and we have the public against us. And even though we protested, we didn't have enough people backing us up. That's why the government did this to us. And they're not going to do anything to say that they did something wrong, because they said it's for national security. So this fellow, he says, no, he says, we've got to go for it. So the National Council brought it up at the National Council meeting. And so they decided to go ahead with it. This was in the 60s. And, but we had problems again, this time within our own Japanese American community, because everybody wants to get in on the act now. And instead of uniting into one, they went with a satellite here, a satellite there, and they says, no, we're going to do it on our own. So like the Seattle group, they said, we have our own senator that he's going to bring it up in the Senate. And sure enough, he did, prematurely. And he was just flatly rejected, with no questions asked. He was just flatly rejected. And so we had people like Senator Inoue and Senator Matsunaga, Mineta, Congressman Mineta, and Congressman Matsui, and Congressman Mink. We had their backing, but we wanted their advice also. So Senator Inoue says, you people, get your act together, unite as one, and submit one proposal. So they said, okay, we'll try to see what we can do. But there were still small satellites here and there that fought us, but we went in anyway, and we went in the right way. We asked Senator Inoue, what's the best way to do it? And he said, oh, you do it this way, and you do it that way, and so on. And that's what we did. And we got quite a few senators to back us up. And this is why it was discussed in Congress, and it was finally passed. It took us about close to 20 years, but they finally passed. And I don't know the exact words of it, but the dollar amount was dropped from $25,000 to $20,000. And there was going to be a formal letter of apology. And so we all got that letter of apology. But they had all kinds of rules attached to it, or conditions attached to the bill that we didn't like, but at least we got the thing passed anyway. And one of the big things that bad about this was that by the time they signed the bill, which was in 1988, when Ronald Reagan signed it, at least 50% of our parents were already gone, dead. They were dead. And provisions in the redress stated that you had to be alive when the document was signed, which meant 1988. I think it was August in 1988. And so, like my parents, they died in. My father died in 1958. My mother died in the early 70s, and so many of the other parents that suffered so much because they had to move out didn't get a penny, and it wasn't. You couldn't inherit that either. I mean, you couldn't. The children couldn't get the money for the parents.
Could you receive it since you were interned yourself?
Yes.
So each individual in your family that was still
Yes.
alive could get $20,000.
Right, right. Because I'm sure my brother and sister lost out more than $20,000. I mean, from their business themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But the good part of it was, as long as you were in camp or born in camp. So children that were maybe just a few days old before the camp closed were still eligible because they were still in camp.
Back at the end of the war, given all the prejudice that was happening, did you ever consider staying on in the Army as a career?
No, I didn't care for the Army life too much as far as because everything was too strict. You have your officers when they give an order, you don't question it. That's it, and I didn't care for that.
Did you personally ever get any citations or
Citation?
decorations
No.
or whatever for you?
The battalion itself did get commendations or citations as a unit, but not individually. We did have medals given out to some of our individuals. Most of them came to the forward observers, the ones that were with the infantry and directed the artillery fire, where they could see the artillery barrages go out. And outside of that, most of your medals came from the infantry.
Do you think there was any prejudice involved in that, in giving out of medals?
Definitely. Out of all the casualties that the 42nd Regiment received, they received one Congressional Medal of Honor, and he was killed in the war. And they have, I forgot how many Distinguished Service Crosses, that I'm almost positive that quite a few of those would have been Medal of Honors if they were Caucasian.
And that has never been
It's never,
fixed up.
not yet. They're working on it now. Because somebody told me right now, not too long ago, that the black community, the black veterans, demanded a review of the medals that were received by the black troops. And somebody told me that there were about 8 Congressional Medal of Honors being issued, replacing the Distinguished Service Crosses.
So do you think that kind of effort is going on in the
Yes, it's going on
Japanese
in the Japanese American also.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Our national JCL had requested this.
Did you ever tell your wife about your war experiences and your thoughts and feelings about them?
Very little. Really nothing to explain.
Have you had any repercussions from any of those experiences? I mean, did you ever have nightmares or any other kinds of things that you could relate to that?
No, nothing.
Do you think it's made any impact in your later life?
I don't think so. It might have been if I was in the infantry, but especially the Charlie Battery of 522nd, we were really lucky. I don't know why it is, but because every time we'd get barrages every so often from the German howitzers, and we'd hear the sounds, the whistling sound, and they would either fall way short of us or they'd fall way behind us, and it would hit in service battery. Our service battery would be behind us, and it would go into their area and not ours. But we had very few casualties as far as our artillery was concerned.
So it sounds like for many years after the war, you didn't think about it, talk about it, or maybe
No.
maybe you didn't even associate with other soldiers except perhaps your brothers.
No, we had reunions of the 442nd, and I didn't go to any for maybe 5 or 10 years, and then all of a sudden I got a notice from one of my buddies in the service, and he says, "Hey, Charlie Battery is trying to round up some guys to go to Hawaii for the 442nd reunion." He says, "Let's try to go." And so we went in, I forgot what year that was. But anyway, since that time, almost every year since that time, they've had reunions, whether it's in Hawaii or San Francisco or Los Angeles or where. And my wife and I have tried to go to every one of them.
When was it that you started to get some renown, started to get some appreciation for your unit? And I know that you've been honored in many ways in the Jewish community. When did that start to happen, and how did that happen?
It started in San Francisco. I forgot what year it was. 1990, when we had our just the 522nd Charlie Battery. That's when they made this book. In fact, I'd have to look at them.
Go right ahead.
I don't know if it has the date on this or not. But anyway, it was around 1990 when Charlie Battery had a reunion. And it was publicized, not extensively, but somehow the Holocaust Oral History Project, Lonnie and Eric, heard about it somehow, and they inquired as to when we were going to have this reunion in San Francisco, and they got in contact with our officer. He was a Japanese American officer. He lives in Harvard. At Cambridge, Mass. And so they got together with this George Oye in Los Altos, and they decided to make it a bagel and sushi reunion. And that was the start of it all, because they interviewed quite a few of the fellows that was actually involved in being the forward observers, and a lot of them were kind of shy as to what to say, because it came on them so suddenly. But I believe that was the start of the publicity on the 522nd being a part of the liberation of Dachau.
And I know you personally have talked in different places. I know Sonoma State.
Yes.
And I don't know, perhaps other places.
I taught at a private school in San Francisco here. I can't remember what the name of the school was, but it was a grade school. And I also talked in Sacramento for the Sugiharas. And I'm not a speaker, so that's one thing I kind of hate to do.
What motivates you to do it then?
Well, I see Lonnie and Eric and the rest of the Holocaust Committee. They're working so hard to publicize this, the Jewish Holocaust that existed, and we hear so much about these skinheads and things that they how they treat people, and knowing how the Jewish people were refugees were treated in Germany, it's really unheard of how they can treat people like that, and so many people around the world won't believe that something like that ever happened, and it's not going to go away, but little by little, if the word is not put out, then the generations, younger generations, are not going to know anything, and it really will die out eventually. Because after I talked to this private school, this little girl, she was about 10 years old, she came up and said, "How come I don't read anything like this in the textbooks that I have in school?" So I told her it's the fault of the Board of Education and the schools, because they reject all the textbooks that have negative information in it, things that they don't want their children to know about. And this is one of the worst and shameful things that ever happened to this United States, is that evacuation.
Do you think that there's still more work to do as far as prejudice against Asian people and Japanese Americans?
Definitely, because we still see it all the time. Not nearly as bad as it used to be, but it's still there. Because my father-in-law, when he first came to this country, it was in the early 1920s, I believe. Anyway, he and his wife took his children, and they had guests, so they wanted to take them out to a restaurant. And the Fisherman's Wharf was very popular at that time. So they took them to one of the restaurants on the waterfront there. And they went in and they sat at a table, and they waited and they waited. They waited 45 minutes and nobody came to the table. And so finally, I can't remember who it was that went up to the waiter and asked him, "We see people going out, coming in, going out, coming in, going out, and they're all served and finished and go up, and we're still not even ordered." Says, "Why?" Says, "Oh, we don't serve Japs." And that was it.
They had to leave.
They left. Because it's my father-in-law's philosophy. Don't raise a ruckus. It's don't make things any worse than what it is. And he just went out.
How about you? What's your point of view if something like that happens?
Oh, at that time, well, say in the 40s, we could protest all we want, but we wouldn't get any help from the outside. Now, if it was in the, say, the 60s and the 70s, you'd have quite a few liberals that would back you up, and you wouldn't have to resort to that kind of a problem by protesting or whatever.
Do you have any more things to say, any more stories you can think of about your life in the camps or your life in the service or the problems you ran into afterward?
Let's see. They mentioned something outside when we were out talking. They talked about about that flag with the 4 stars.
And racism in the service.
Oh yes. Actually, we didn't have any problem with the GIs in the service, especially
White,
overseas. Right. Especially overseas.
Did you have much interaction with them?
Well, we were attached to a Caucasian unit. Every time we went into combat, we were attached to a Caucasian outfit. Like we started out with the 34th Division, which was made up of Midwesterners, and we got along with them real well.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I really don't know. But when we got transferred to the 36th Division, which was a Texas division, it wasn't quite the same. I don't know what it is, but the feeling wasn't exactly the same. But that all changed after the Lost Battalion.
They admired you.
Yeah, after
Very
that,
much so.
it was completely different. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you have got millions of medals and citations for that alone?
They did get quite a few. I don't know how many, but they got mostly Purple Hearts.
Well, before we come to the end, anyway, you have your caps here with your company. Insignia,
Yes,
right?
this is our Charlie Battery. I mean, a 522nd Field Artillery Battalion cap.
And that's the same symbol as on your shirt, right?
Yes, the shirt is also the 522nd.
Okay.
This is the 442nd regimental cap. Usually this comes out of the VFW, and it shows the 100th 442nd, and also it shows our insignia, which is the Liberty flag.
And go for broke, is that
And
kind of like
that-
your motto?
Yes, that's our motto. Go for broke is our motto.
And do you have any message that you would like to leave or any kind of philosophy that you would like to speak of, given all these events?
No, I don't. The only thing I can say is I just hope the world learns about the Jewish Holocaust and all the sad stories that have come out of it, and teach your children about humanity and what's right and what's wrong, and that everybody is equal and they should be treated just like you want to be treated. I guess that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you very, very much for coming and doing this. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. You could take this pencil, please, and point yourself out in the photograph, okay?
Oh, okay.
Over here.
Which one? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Okay. There you are.
There I am.
And what is this a photograph of?
This is a group photograph of the reunion, and I believe this was the one in Kona, Hawaii.
And is your wife in this picture?
No, I don't see her in. I don't see her in there. I've got such good eyes. Oh yes, she is. Yeah, and this is my wife right here.
Okay.
She's right in the middle.
And
These are all from Charlie Battery of 522nd Field Artillery.
okay. And the next one is
This is the same reunion in Kona, Hawaii, and
just another occasion.
yes, this is
Okay.
myself.
Okay.
Okay. This is a photo of the reunion in Reno, Nevada. It's of the whole 442nd Regimental Combat Team. And this is myself and my wife. And this is Serge Carlesso. He just recently died, not too long ago. He was the mayor of Bruyères in France. And this is a member of the of Charlie Battery.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know who that girl is.
And now this next one is part of the same
Okay.
reunion.
Yes, it's part of the same reunion. This is Manabe Hirosaki, Ray. See, I forgot his name.
That's okay.
Ray Kunimura, Tsutomu Fujimoto, and myself. We're all from Charlie Battery.
Mm-hmm. Same reunion.
Same reunion,
Okay.
yes, as the one in Reno, yes.
Okay.
Okay, this photo was taken in the hotel room of Senator Danny Inoue at the Reno 442nd reunion. And this is Senator Inoue and this is myself.
And the next one?
And this photo is the same reunion in Reno, Nevada. And this is one of the few Congressional Medal of Honor winners, Hershey Miyamura from Arizona. And this is myself. He was one of the speakers at the reunion.
Okay. Great.
This is a picture taken in Sacramento honoring the survivors and the liberator. This is Mrs. Chiune Sugihara. She's the widow of Chiune Sugihara, who wrote all those visas for the Jewish refugees. And this is one of the survivors, Sally Ganar.
Okay.
Now, I don't know where this was taken. I thought it was Sacramento, but Lonnie wasn't there, so it's got to be at one of the, I don't know if this was at the Japantown in San Francisco, where they were honoring Mrs. Sugihara here. And this is myself and my wife, and this is Lonnie Silver.
And do you know who the other woman is?
No, I don't know her.
Yeah, that's
Is that
that's
Mrs.?
the interpreter, Masami Kobayashi.
Oh, that's right, the interpreter.
Okay.
Okay.
This is a photo of Mr. Sugihara, his son Hiroki, and his wife Yuki.
move the other one on.
I believe this is a photo of my 60th birthday party that my wife gave to me at a surprise party at in 1981, around there sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a photo of myself here.
And where was that?
This was in Germany on the Autobahn. These German planes were hidden in the forest, and this is a jet plane, which we had never seen before until close to the end of the war. The reason all these planes were in the forest is they didn't have fuel and they couldn't take off. See, what they did was they used what we call the freeway. They call it the Autobahn. And they used the Autobahn as the takeoff for the planes. And then when they landed, they hid them in the forest.
Do you know about when this might be?
This was in the early part of 1945.
Okay. Move on to the next one.
Probably around March. Now this is my weapon carrier with my machine gun. I was a machine gunner in the artillery, and that's my machine gun. And let's see, I'm right here, and these are my buddies in Charlie Battery 522nd.
And do you know about where that is?
No, I don't.
Or when?
This was 1945 also.
Okay.
This is also a picture of my weapon carrier with the machine gun on it, and this is myself and my buddies from the 522nd Field Artillery.
Okay.
And this is a photo of the crematorium, one of many at Dachau. And this was taken after the war was over.
Are you in this photograph at all?
No, I think I took this picture. I'm not sure, but I had an old Agfa camera that.
Okay.
Okay, this is a photo of myself. Someplace in Germany. I don't know where exactly the location of that. But,
Okay.
this was when, back in Nice, when our Charlie Battery was up in Menton, France, near the Italian border, up in the northern part of France and Italy. And I was on temporary duty with another outfit doing MP work at this hotel that's in the background here, the Eden Hotel. And I was there for about 3 weeks.
Okay.
This is a picture of myself in, I believe it was during the occupation when we were in Donauwörth. And I don't know what that, I think it was American, not USO, but some rest area anyway.
Okay.
And I don't know where this is, but it's in Germany someplace. Where I just happened to take a picture like that.
Okay.
This is a photo of my parents, my oldest brother, and the third brother. These are my parents right here, and my oldest brother, and my brother just above me. This was taken in Chicago, I believe. It was after the war.
In your parents' apartment in Chicago?
Yes, I think so. This photo was taken in 1943, early part of 1943, right in front of my luxury apartment in camp in Poston, Arizona.
So that was the barracks there?
Yes,
that you
that's
went
that's the barracks.
from. Okay.
And that apartment had 7 people in it. Okay. Anyway, these are all members of Charlie Battery, and I'm the only one that, with this helmet, I have my hand over my face.
And this is a postcard, it would seem.
It looked like, I can't remember what this was for. It sure looks like a postcard, but it's too big for a postcard.
Okay.
This picture shows my wife and myself not long after we got married, and it proves that I had some hair.
Okay.
So this is in the early 50s. Okay. This photo was taken at the wedding of my wife's older sister in 1951, where I was in the bridal party with one of the ushers, and my wife was the maid of honor
Okay.
for her sister. This is a photo of myself and my 4 brothers. This is my oldest brother, Masao. This is the next brother, Shigeo, who was permanently disabled in Italy with the 142nd. And this is my 3rd brother. He was in the Army for 5 years, and he lucked out by not having to go overseas. And this is my youngest brother, Goro, who still lives in Chicago.
And your sister is absent from this picture.
My sister, yes, we just took the boys' picture, and my sister is gone now. So
And where was this taken?
this was taken in Los Angeles. Let's see at one of the churches in the yard.
And do you know about when this was?
Let's see. Sometime in the 80s.